on everything.
I'm not seeing it on Twitch yet.
Okay, let me.
Oh no, I do.
Oh yay! Oh, and it has our little song in the background, which I forgot about.
But yeah, so Javier and Andres, make sure to mute the Twitch stream. Otherwise, there will be a sound
echo
loop.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yes. Come on, Alex. It's not our first rodeo. Come on.
I know, but just to be sure.
No worries. No worries.
So, everyone that's starting to join us, it should be live on all the platforms now. Today we are doing a special of Archaeogaming that is back to how we normally stream on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch. So of course it will be saved on all those platforms as well. But today we have on some of the creators of the game Dream of Darkness, which is still being created. So it's not out yet. So we are getting fun special previews and all of that kind of stuff today. We're very excited. And then of course, Kate and Alex are here to host the session as always. So what is SASA? SASA stands for Save Ancient Studies Alliance. It's our mission to reverse the current downward trend in the study of the ancient world by engaging the public and bringing together students and scholars to share their passion for the ancient world and inspire a vast new generation of students. I read that really fast. I like got it memorized now, basically. But you guys probably know the spiel. We do this in many ways, including these kinds of live streams, our Archaeogaming live streams that we've been doing a lot on Twitch. We're playing through Curse of the Pharaohs right now. We also usually have book clubs. We have reading groups, of course, research on the downward trend, an access database, and lots of other great things on our website. So please check that out. You can find us by searching Save Ancient Studies Alliance on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Twitch, YouTube, Discord, etc. Please follow and subscribe. And you can become I skipped the protocol. Please be kind and respectful. Listen and ask thoughtful questions. We definitely want to hear from you in the chat. That is the reason for doing live streams, so that we can hear from you guys and answer your questions. Be patient with technology and those administering it, please and thank you. Again, the recordings will be saved on the platforms where they're being streamed, and I guess kind of spoiler alert still, because we're learning about a game that's not out yet. So, and then of course you can become a recurring donor of SASA for as little as $3 a month. You can also subscribe directly on Twitch. Becoming a recurring donor is through PayPal on our website. You can make us your favorited charity on Amazon Smile, and then shop on Amazon Smile, and then just a portion of what you buy, pay for, goes directly to that. So those are ways that you can support us so that we can keep doing these kinds of streams and pay the awesome experts that work with us and our interns and all of that fun stuff. So with that, thank you for joining us, and I will hand it over to Kate and Alex.
Thank you, Lauren. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you guys for being here. We are very excited for this. It was a long time in the making. We've been secretly working at it for the past few months. And welcome, Alex. It's always good to see you several times a week.
I'm very happy about it.
Never gets old, I guess.
Yeah, right. Good teams. And so welcome to our guests. So if you'd like to introduce yourselves and tell us who you are and what do you do and what is this about? Let's start chill, and then let's get more into the details of the
Before the introduction, can I pour myself the drink that I prepared for the stream?
Sure, yeah.
We strongly
we're so happy. Go ahead, Andres, go ahead.
While Javier pours his drink, let me introduce myself. My name is Andres Rojas, 100% Mexican marketing manager and community manager from Dream of Darkness. You can read me tweeting at Dream of Darkness on Twitter, on our Discord, newsletter, and so on and so forth. And my boss, my drinking loving boss right down here is...
I'm Javier Rayón. I'm the director and writer of Dream of Darkness. I am based in Mexico City, what is the capital of Mexico, naturally, but also back in the day, the capital of the Aztec Empire.
Lovely to be here.
Yeah,
So-
we love to finally be here because I mean we have been friends and fans of SASA for a while. I believe that I had so many questions. I asked you, Kate, back in the day, have you been to the Arab World Institute in Paris? Because it's so cool that you cover everything. You cover Assassin's Creed, you cover indie games like ours. So thank you for shining the spotlight on history.
I mean, we try, right? History should not only be for AAA games, and we're actually very happy to have smaller, smaller projects to come in and amplify them as much as we can. We are also a small project to start with, so spreading the good vibes and hoping to get them back in return.
And it is impressive for me when I heard Lauren's introduction that even the classics have this issue of not enough research anymore, because I get the impression naturally as a non-specialist that if there is a field that would get attention, the resources, it would be Rome, it would be Greece, but it is surprising to me that even those fields are facing challenges.
Yeah,
I feel that most people have a bias, right? That everything that Greece had to tell was already told, and everything that Egypt had to tell was already told. But it's not really. I have learned as a Mexican from 27 years of being a Mexican, I have learned a lot from working in this game. It's incredible.
Yeah, I mean, games are a way of keeping those histories alive, and they're one of the primary media today where people get to know stuff about these cultures and ancient cultures as well. So it's why we love doing these game related things, because games are just so huge today that it will be a pity or a shame if we didn't try to use them to spread the word on ancient cultures and antiquity.
Absolutely. I can notice the difference. For example, one of my first contacts with Rome was with the movie Gladiator. And those new TikTok generation kids, they're like, what's that? I'm like, they are getting to know so many of the contexts that I enjoyed back in the day, but with Assassin's Creed or with GTA. Yes. Dr. Esther Bright from the HGN, she says that so many people in the world get to know the US because of GTA. So it is important to get to know the game in order to know what these kids are perceiving. And in the same way, we feel an opportunity for the Aztecs, for our ancestors. There's fortunately international interest, curiosity for them, but naturally, since there has not been that much research, there are so many misconceptions. So we hope not only to clarify those misconceptions, but to make it a very special, fun game. So Andres prepared a presentation where we can see a few ways where we do that.
Please.
So let me share it real quick. It's basically what we're going to present right here is history-driven characters, or our secret sauce to make games that provoke thought and consciousness. Of course, we have already told you, I am Andres Rojas, he is Javier Rayón. And let's begin with a question. Have you guys ever heard of Isabel Rodriguez? Alex?
Nope. I don't think I have, no.
It's okay, but we didn't either until Javier discovered her.
And you can ask any Mexican, you can ask any Spanish person. No one has heard of
no one knows. So Javier, if you want to detail us who she was, please.
Sure. So it's super easy in any game to pick, I don't know, Patton, or to pick Leonidas, the cool heroes of history. The problem with those characters is, one, they have a lot of misconceptions around them. And in order for any indie game to stand out, you really need to be memorable. You cannot be just one more of those tales. In our case, we were looking for a protagonist who could be special, memorable, and we thought, instead of just choosing someone who will kill all the things, we can find someone who is closer to curiosity, closer to our cosmic horror vibe. So the closest that we were able to find to a researcher, to an adventurer, was Isabel Rodriguez. Why? Because she was a real person who was the first nurse of the Americas. And I love that she was in a forbidden text. Many texts of the Spanish were censored back in the day, even among themselves. So I was only able to find her by reading Cervantes de Salazar's Chronicle of the New Spain. And there they told that she was this war doctor who learned when she was here with the Spanish, with Cortés. Everyone was an improvised adventurer. And as Andres wrote, she was a badass because she was learning, but she was also fighting, but she was also healing. So I believe that gives us an opportunity for something different and fun for our game.
Not only for the game wise, but it is also, she is a very important character, as you will see playing the game or reading our thread on Twitter. She is actually the first nurse of the Americas. You can ask any doctor, any nurse in Mexico or Latin America, and people will not know who she is. And she's very relevant, and she was hidden, literally hidden in the text, forbidden text. So this is a way for our game to help the world, spread the word about Isabel, who she is. And she is not just the wife of Cortés, or one of the many wives of Cortés. She's actually a war doctor, the first nurse, and a bunch of other things, right? She's a voice that needs to be heard. And the only way we could find to give her a voice was through gameplay. So not only are you learning about her, but you're making her choices, deciding for her, and living the story through her eyes and through her body. And she isn't, of course, mentioned in any text, just the censored text Javier mentioned. And we decided to make her one of the protagonists of our game for these reasons. She is a very strong character, very important to be heard of, to be known. And no one does. Only a couple of historians mention her here and there, but there's no big pages of her in history books. There's no monuments to her. There's no libraries named after her. There's nothing to tell us she was a real person that existed until now that we have a video game, of course, which is putting a little bit of panache on our game, but it's true. We are so far the only people to give her a voice and to give her a name, a face, and an identity. And we want the world to know who she is and to change the perspective of who the Spanish were when they arrived to Mexico.
Absolutely. I believe it helps a lot. If you ask any player, who is your favorite Mass Effect character? Oh my God, the debate is so fun because people will say, Garrus, Tali, and they go for their characters. And what I like a lot about BioWare, and in general, when it's character-driven stories instead of plot-driven, is that the characters are the medium for the player, for the audience, to get to know a lot about the respective factions, groups, cultures. Getting to know, in the case of Mass Effect Garrus, you get to know a lot in a more interesting, digestible way, his suspicious way of life. In the same way, our Isabel, you can see her in her character sheet here. We try to make her to tell a lot about all of the Spanish and women in medieval Europe. It would be so easy to just take the stereotype that we get taught here in Mexico about the Spanish and about women. So it would be just this blonde woman, potentially in armor. And instead, what we do is to have a fun, memorable game, is to really go crazy in the amount of research that we do. So we contact, for example, researchers in fabrics. You can see there that her own dress is kind of turned down because that's how medieval nurses would do bandages. They would tear out their own dresses in order to quickly improvise something. You can see that she also has leeches. So that is one of the highlights of medieval medicine at the time. You can see also...
They still use leeches, let me tell you. They are still used in the medical profession.
Kate, tell me a bit about that, please.
Oh no, they still use them. My wife is a doctor, and yeah, she's the source of this. They still use them.
Oh my God.
I won't say where, but yeah, they're still used. My concern was, do they get paid in blood or what? But yeah, they're still used. So
it's symbiosis, like Venom.
Yeah, they get a good meal out of it. I really believe that reality is stranger than fiction. So in a similar way, our Isabel is a bit brown. Maybe if we get, I don't know, the screen right, like she may be browner than me. So we usually think, oh, all of the Indians were shorter and brown, and all of the Spanish were all taller and blonde. So our Isabel, even with her skin, she tells a bit of her potential origin. She is wearing, if you can see, a bracelet that is kind of bluish. And that would be forbidden at the time because she has a few elements of Moorish ancestry. Spain, when they arrived here, the Spanish had just unified. They had the Al-Andalus Caliphate. The Spanish then were not prosecuting just, let's say, people who here in Mexico had different religious beliefs. Even in the recently unified Spain, that was happening. So our Isabel, like many people, will be scared of her own allies because there's no one unified way to portray the Spanish. We try to get across all of these nuances.
So it'll move on a little bit. This is the portrayal of Isabel in our game. Javier designed her to be a multifaceted character, not just the woman, the doctor, the explorer. She's all of these things put together, and this translates into games mechanics, right? So she will be able to tend to explorers' wounds. She's a investigator, so she's going to solve mysteries of ancient Tenochtitlan. She mixes what she has learned in the New World and Mexica medicine and what she learned in Spanish or what she brought from her Spanish comrades. Do you heal, to tend to wounds, cure curses, and do so much more. She's not only saying I'm Spanish, but she's also I'm Spanish, but I have been from Mexica. I have done this and that. I am more than just a girl from Spain, right?
More than just a girl, absolutely.
What were your thoughts when you were writing this character to give her these multiple aspects?
Sure. So I really enjoy, as I was mentioning, character-driven stories, both in games and outside. However, it is a reality that every game has to find a way to stand out. So right now, if we try to, let's say, compete by having the most badass of all the badassest, well, there will always be a guy with a bigger weapon. Or there will be always a character with more pixels. Those fights, we recognize that we cannot win those. But the fights that we can win and the fights that I, let's say, with my writing, try to face is to going deep into the suffering that each unique person can have. Not to get, let's say, something that feels, let's say, too downer or constantly horrible, but by going deep into the specific prosecution, like Isabel's potentially Moorish origin, or how she's very curious for things that maybe her companions will be saying, how can you perform witchcraft, which sadly many women were accused of. I believe that can give us more strength for the mechanics, for the art. We really try to take the opportunities of history, transform it into characters that personify all of these historic opportunities. And once we have our characters with compelling, strong motivations, we try those to create more interesting mechanics, always thinking about our audience. I don't want to, as many of my colleagues, just, let's say, do what I like and the team should follow what I like as a director. That can work with many other indie games. So, but what's the risk of going entirely artistic or director driven is that I wouldn't benefit from my teammates. Andres sometimes tells me, be careful, because if you do this, what is our audience going to think? Each of our specialists, we work a lot in order to recruit the best specialists so that we always have something more whole and identifying what could be a risk in terms of communication, in terms of implementing. But this is the process. That way, we hope that the chaotic balance of these parts helps us to build something deeper instead of just bigger.
Yeah. So moving on, we have a very brief Spanish lesson, right? This word malinchista, which is a word that you hear a lot here in Mexico, a whole lot. It means a person who prefers the foreign over its own, right? So a very quick example is if Mexico is playing a soccer game against Germany or against any country, and you root for Germany, you're a malinchista. If you buy some clothes or shoes or whatever that celebrate another country, you are malinchista, right? And this word, its origin is very interesting because it's not from a thing or a Mexica word or anything. It comes from a person, an actual living person.
Yeah. If you can go back just very quickly, Andres, because the images are super interesting. So this is the person, like you were going to say, Andres. We can see different portrayals of this person where the word malinchista comes from. It's from the what we call here in Mexico Malinche, this woman. So we can see on the right Malinche and on the left Cortés, supposedly both. Oh my God, these are the stereotype full depictions of the characters. So on the left we get, let's say, wise, strong Cortés. And on the right, sadly, this ape-like depiction of Malinche. Supposedly the European is the one who is the real person and the traitor is the savage person. This is a painting, a mural by Siqueiros. So many games, and that can work absolutely. They just focus on their game and that's it. It's hard work. So they just try to create their game, publish it, hope for the best. In our case, we understand a bit, try to depict the context. In this case, Malinche has a huge history behind her. She has been used sometimes in order to create the national identity of Mexico. You should not be a traitor like Malinche. You should not be savage and basic like her, like in this painting. In the 20th century, that's how the identity of Mexico was built. And if you can go ahead, Andres.
Oh, of course.
And this is another depiction that has tragically been shown of this very same character. Again, we have on the left Cortés and on the right Malinche. This is from the Amazon series Hernán. And another stereotype, like you have seen with Pocahontas, is that you have the indigenous woman who fell in love with the Spanish adventurer who was just in a difficult situation, but tried to find the best of both worlds. So what's the reality? What's the real thing of this? Go ahead, Andres. Maybe you can tell us.
So, as you might have figured it out, Malinchista comes from Malinche, right? This character who was given to the Spanish as a gift, sold to the Spanish as a gift. So she could be as a slave, mostly. So she could be a translator, a way to communicate, a something that the Spanish could use, literally. So in our minds, she's traitor because she allied herself with the Spanish. She embraced her Spanishness, right? So in that sense, we made her an insult. We made her something not to be, right? You cannot be a Malinchista. You cannot be La Malinche because she was a traitor. And this person was not an actual ally of the Spanish. She was a victim of circumstance.
Exactly.
If you like, you can check out our thread on Marina on Twitter. We explained that she was always from her birth to her death on horrible conditions, right? On horrible situations and context of being sold, of being a slave, being a sex slave, actually. And she had to do the best with what she had. We're not saying she's a hero. We're not saying she's a villain. We're putting her into context so people can stop saying Malinchista is an insult, that being La Malinche is an insult, something bad. She was just a human being that made choices and had choices being made for her, right? So I don't know if you want to go deeper into this or explain something else.
Absolutely. So sometimes I have heard on SASA streams where you identify these elements of Assassin's Creed are so well done, but if only, and there's always this if only you as experts constantly suggest. So Marina is a great example of how I took a step away and allowed our historian to have more agency in games. Many times it is developers who are not experts who say what characters, what locations, what plot events will happen. And historians, archaeologists come second, just to add some details to what other people who are not experts have already determined that will appear in our game. And in this case, for a particular event in our game, our historian said, what if you use Malinche? And like Andres was saying, I was like, but she's a traitor. I don't like her. I'm a Mexican. I was educated here. And the historian said, you have to read this paper because what you know of Marina could be wrong. And I'm like, okay, let's do the reading. This is an insider secret. Since games are so expensive, it's very hard to make time. It slows development, it slows down development in order to get to read and inform yourself of any period, of any character, of any context. But we did the homework. So I realized, like Andres was saying, like our thread has described, that so many things that have been taught here of Marina are wrong. How could she be as a lover of Cortés? She was 13 years old when the events of our game happened, when the war began. I didn't even know that she is a symbol for people outside of Mexico. So for Chicanos, for people of Mexican origin who live in the US, she is a symbol. I had no idea about that. You never hear that in Mexico because naturally she has been misunderstood, she has been oppressed. So recently, this is something that has happened now. She is a symbol. So we thought, okay, in this part of our game, we need someone who can put together pieces, who can put together what happened from the Mexica point of view and from the Spanish point of view. And she was the only one of that period, as our historian corrected us, who was able to speak Nahuatl and who was able to speak Spanish. So we made the homework, and you can see how in her character design, she's very different from the trader ape. She's very different from the lover who is just generic indigenous in her clothes. So in this case, we show how she has the Spanish color of the shirt. She was baptized, like everything that came in contact with the Spanish. So she has already her cross, but she is wearing the glyph of speech. If you can see these blue symbols. So in Mexica codices, she always appears, well, in Mesoamerican codices, sorry, she always appears with that glyph that was reserved for people who had the word, who were able to speak, since she was always negotiating between our emperor and Cortés and the Spanish, between the Tlaxcalteca and the Spanish, all the groups that the Spanish found. She is always associated with that glyph, and that glyph was usually reserved for the highest rulers, because that's what our term for emperor means. Huaytlatuani is the great speaker. For us, the word was power, and she was always represented with the word. So this is an artistic decision by us. We included that real glyph so that we find all the potential symbols that we can have. She also has these feathers, because she was really liked by the Tlaxcalteca. We usually hear that, oh, it was the Spanish who destroyed the Mexica. They were the big enemies. But in fact, as we'll play in our game, it was the Tlaxcalteca, their local rivals. So one of the groups that the Spanish eventually found and where Marina helped was in order to get those great warriors, the Tlaxcalteca, to join the group so that they became allies against the Mexica. And since the Tlaxcalteca appreciate her, she has a bit of clothes also of the Tlaxcalteca. So again, we try to go deep by making use of all the historic opportunities, hopefully in order to make something deeper.
Yeah, so same as Isabel, Javier wrote some incredible mechanics for her to do in the game, mechanics that translate what she did in history into gameplay. So if you want to explain what we had her do in our game, Javier, after that makes it.
It's a bit of the spoiler territory. Should I go in? No? Yes? No?
Just a little bit. Just around.
Of course.
Go around.
Of course. I can't say no to Alex. So, in our game, we're exploring, as we have shared elsewhere, what started the war between the Mexica, the Spanish, the Tlaxcalteca. So she will be able to use the Spanish in order to learn some of the elements because even the Spanish were surprised about the violence. So she will be able to speak with them, but she will also be able to speak with the Tlaxcalteca, and she will also be able to speak with the Mexica. We went to the Lara Croft way of doing things, that Lara Croft immediately understands all the cultures just by taking a look like, oh, of course it says that. I mean, it can work. We have the term, right? Video game logic. But we also want our player, like Marina, to sometimes find things that she cannot possibly know, like potentially some hints of the gods. So by having this same conflict in this violent place, she will find Tenochtitlan destroyed, the Mexica capital destroyed, and even she won't know what happened. Many of the Spanish are as surprised as her that the Mexica are suddenly attacking her. The player as her should be able to understand, okay, they are attacking me because X happened, but eventually it will be more surprising that even Marina, with all her knowledge, with her mastery of languages, even she won't be able to understand some things. Many times in cosmic horror and with many games, how do you portray gods? By making them bigger, by making them just stronger, but eventually by being able to kill them. If you can kill them, then how much of a god they really are. So in our case, we try to explore other more interesting ways so that you really feel that these were Aztec gods. And by having environmental impact, by having destruction that cannot be explained by human means, then we hope that Marina can also be scared of things that she knows that are out of her control.
Of course, the main thing about our game and the main thing we're trying to compel to people is that in the Spanish contact with the Mexica, the arrival to Mesoamerica, there were no heroes, there were no villains. It's not like we were trying to sanctify the Mexica and say that everything they did was good, because it wasn't, clearly. And everything the Spanish did was not bad. As we saw, there was a war doctor who was in charge of healing people from Mesoamerican origins, right? And there are also no traitors. There's no Malinche. Malinchismo isn't real in actual context, right? She was not someone who chose the Spanish over her own people. She was someone who was chosen by the Spanish or by her own people to be given away to the Spanish. So we're trying to create these complex characters that make history more fascinating and make not only the story of our game, but history more compelling to research, to study, to learn. And when the game over, or the thank you for playing screen rolls out, you can feel that you have learned something, right? Not only about history, that, oh yeah, the Mexican was very big, or oh yeah, the Mexica did these rituals, but that there's more to the Mexica that meets the eye. There's more to the Spanish that meets the eye. Explorers were not really soldiers or epic warriors. The Mexica were not vile, bloodthirsty cannibals. So yeah, that's what the way we think that our game can help to fix the world, to fix history, to change what we perceive about the past right now, through gameplay, through interesting mechanics, and through, of course, very, very interesting characters. And if you would like to hear more about our game and to really understand how we translate historical fact into gameplay, into level design, character design, or whatever, you can log into bit.ly/DOD SASA. And this link will give you access to a very special bundle pack that has research, our level design, scene script, and a lot more things. And you will also have access to our newsletter, which we update bi-weekly. And you will be able to learn how we translate history into gameplay, if that's something you're interested, and something that you guys really, really are. We think this is really, really valuable, and we would love for you to have it. Tell us what you think about it, share it with friends, and use it for class, use it for whatever you want to use it. Javier, I don't know.
Use it for your next leeches session.
Of course, your next leeching, your next conquering of new worlds, pillaging, and whatnot. So guys, this is it for our presentation. I don't know if you have any questions for us. We're very, very happy to try to answer them. Mind you, have a very, very huge disclaimer that we are not historians, but we will try to answer everything as historically accurate as we can.
But we admire historians and all
Very
researchers. I've seen Kate taking notes. I need to hear her questions.
I'm not sure. I'm scared of her questions.
So thank you so much for this. It was a really interesting presentation, and thank you for sharing so much about the game. And I mean, my own research is about characters in games, and you focused on characters so much, and then I really enjoyed that. So if anyone in the chat on all of our platforms has any questions, please ask them, and we will ask them to the team. I know you were interested in Kate's question, but I also have some questions of my own, if that's okay. For example, one of your last slides, you were talking about history, and there's no necessarily no good heroes, no evil villains specifically. And I think that's a very interesting point. But how does that work in terms of story structure, for example? Because in traditional story structures, the story is told from a perspective of a hero, and then there's an evil force or a villain, and because the story is told from a certain perspective, I can imagine that there's bound to be some ideas of good and bad associated with certain characters. So how does that work, or how does that ideology or vision work with constructing the narrative of the game?
Sure. So in terms of the structure, as you will say, Alex, most of games and even potentially narrative as a whole uses the hero's journey. Mm-hmm. So that's why we usually think of games in that way. We'll have a good guy versus a villain, and that can work. Mm-hmm. In our case, we take the opportunities of cosmic horror and our period. So we're going more for the fallen hero or the renegade's journey, which is another structure. For example, we have seen that in The Godfather, in the books and in the movies. And you have someone who has goals, who tries to do positive things, but he's faced Corleone with impossible odds, and he has to do increasingly more terrible and more terrible and more terrible things. Those structures can work across different genres. You can have heroes in fantasies, you can have heroes in nonfiction. And in the same way, in our case with cosmic horror and history, I like this structure because it takes us away from the idea, like we have already said, of heroes, of villains. I like more complex characters. We believe that there is now a moment in our industry where people want to see this diversity, this richness in characters. It has been evolving for a long time. I love that, for example, in Final Fantasy VII, the classic villain of Sephiroth, still, you would get to see that he was a child subject to experimentation. So you get a small sense of empathy that makes a more interesting, compelling character. He was a friend of the protagonist in the past. Mm-hmm. So that additional nuance makes an eventual fight, in the case of Final Fantasy, far more personal, far more than just the music and the mechanics. It adds another layer. So in our case, we are playing a lot with those people who do increasingly terrible things, so that the events are more impactful, even more than what we may be seeing on the screen.
So I would also add that there are no villains, there are antagonists, and that the real villain is context and the place you're living, the time you're living in, that pushes them to do horrible things or good things, depends on how you see them.
Yeah, sure. I mean, good and bad are relative. So, I mean, they're not absolute constructs, but that's an interesting point that you make, and especially with the example of Sephiroth, like the humanization of the antagonist character is I think almost always more interesting than just a bland, flat, bad character. So that's I think that's a really interesting point. I don't know if Kate has something.
I have questions that are not about the characters per se, although the whole situational side of evil and like choices that we make and like increasingly bad and bad and worse, like it reminded me of Macbeth, right? Because you started one small thing and then everything just escalates, and then next thing you know, you're killing the king. But you don't necessarily see it when you're in the moment, right? Which is what happens in complex situations, especially in times of war, because you're trying to do your own thing, survive, conquer, but then again, you don't necessarily have a larger vision of what is going on and of what the consequences of your actions are, which is something very human, right? Sometimes we make decisions and they bite us back. So that is interesting. I would also say my first contact with the Aztec Empire was through Age of Empires 2. So I played the campaign with Cuauhtemoc and the warriors of Tenochtitlan.
Sure.
So I'm kind of biased in that sense. That
No. It is an interesting depiction. Yeah. Because they tried to make us sympathize with the Aztec, with the Mexica, even though they repeat a few colonial misconceptions.
Oh, yeah. Oh, plenty of them. I mean, Age of Empires 2 is a great entertainment. Historical accuracy? Questionable, right? But I mean, you've seen us play Assassin's Creed, so. I have one question about historical accuracy and one about gods. So I think I'm going to start with the gods, because you mentioned the Aztec gods and all of that. And we've had conversations about the divinities in the Assassin's Creed series and talked about them. And especially with Origins, we wish they would have been a bit more fleshed out. That they would have talked about religion a bit more. So my question would be, how much will the players be able to learn or glimpse about the Aztec pantheon? And like, are you gonna just give them like some names and some information and some unexplicable things, and then you hope that they will go look for sources on their own? Are you gonna give them like a codex, let's say, on the side, so they can learn about these deities? Because it is a crazy and very colorful pantheon, but it's also very complex. So I was wondering how you're approaching that.
Oof, that's a great question. I constantly have conversations with Andres. He asks me, can we please share this? Can we share that? And I'm like, please go ahead. But at the same time, it's a challenge because, as you say, it's impossible. If we had a Mexica today in front of us, and if I ask him, what is this god about, Huitzilopochtli? Oof, he would say, well, take a seat, because they are so complex. So we have to make choices. We have to go through an intense editing process. We won't show naturally all of the facets of the gods. So instead, I believe strongly into seeing as an opportunity that we have to convey deeply and in short amounts of time. So number one, we try to stay away from text-heavy content. It is a fact that we can read on Polygon and in other publications that even though story-driven games are well sold, very few people actually finish the main storyline, actually read all of the content. So if we just had a beautiful, gorgeous Aztec god and he would chat Mass Effect style, like, I am the supreme being and blah, 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 many people would just skip ahead. So what do we try to do instead? Like I was saying, first, we make use of academic findings. Then we try to find opportunities for the impact of specific gods to be felt in the environmental storytelling. BioShock is, for example, amazing into this. So it's one of our references. You don't get to see in the very first BioShock what was the party, what was the civil war. You just see the aftermath in the environmental. And in the same way, you don't see some events like exactly the beginning of the war. We make use of the fact that it is a mystery that academics are still trying to figure out. So while we include the real violence, we also add hints of a specific destruction that only some gods could do. So only some entities, only some gods, but very specific. And we try to be, it is a hard balance of being subtle, but at the same time, creating hype. So that you should never face the gods in full-blown gladiatorial combat. And thanks to Lovecraft and cosmic horror, we try to convey that the gods, while they have an impact, they should be thinking, behaving with goals like in another dimension, in another way of thinking beyond puny humans. So in that sense, Mexica gods are very interesting because the name of our country, Mexico, even tells a small cosmic horror story. Mexico means place in the navel of the moon. So our entire identity, our entire city, and part of our game is about something related to the moon, a threat maybe around, and we, the Mexica, are supposed to take care of that. You will see hints of that, but you will briefly see the gods. Instead of they being like full-blown enemies that talk to you all the time and you kill them all the time, they should have a second priority.
I like that a lot. I like that. One of the criticism that some people have with how, for instance, Greek and Roman gods are represented is that they're too human. But that is also in the source material. They are catty, they are petty, they are a bunch of, a
Dionysius is my favorite.
Yeah, exactly. They're party people. They're a problematic family. But what is missing in several games, I think, is like the distance between humans and gods, right? Gods have their own agendas and they have their own things. They're not your uncle and your auntie that are fighting over their divorce, right? They have other things that are cosmic forces. So in that sense, I mean, I'm very interested in your approach to them, and I think it would be extremely cool. And also terrifying, right? Because often we forget that godly powers are also supposed to be terrifying and not just vaguely ominous.
There's an extra god that he's said to be the one who gives and the one who takes. If he heals like it, you're gonna be struck with disease. You're gonna be struck with poor and whatever. So they are forces to be reckoned with and things to be scared of, actually.
Exactly.
Right. Alex, do you have another question? We have a list of questions, so we have several different documents.
I love that this is our job, right, Andres?
No, very interesting about the gods as well. I was wondering, so with any historical video game, we've been talking about Assassin's Creed as well, and but also with other games, there's this mixture between what you want to be historical, that historical accuracy, for lack of a better term, and then has to be some sort of recognizability of the history. And then you already touched a little bit on that. How does that work when actually designing a game? How does the compromising, or if there's a compromising aspect in the game design, how do you decide what makes it in? What do we want to convey to people? What do we think won't be successful with them? I'm thinking about this game, The Forgotten City, that came out in July, I think, and it's a fantastic game. It was very well received, but all of the marble statues or buildings are all plain white. There isn't any color like you see in Odyssey, for example. And the developers have explained it as that they would feel it would be too jarring for audiences to see all of the different colors of antiquity, because that's not how the image of antiquity they have is constructed. So how does that work when you're building something like this yourself?
Oof, yeah, I know that the palette was saturated, right, in the Greco-Latin cities. I'd love to be able to visit those. For me, modern people, modern person, jarring, saturated colors, I'd love to see them. So how do we pick, Alex? We really try, again, to find the historical opportunities according to the kind of story that we're telling, and then really comment it with first the team, and then what resonates with our audience. Because there will be moments when a historical opportunity is very expensive in terms of game development. So in terms of game development, we try to make full use of being small. Sometimes my colleagues get a bit scared or feel like, oh my God, there's a new trailer every day, basically, in the games industry. So we should work faster. We should finish the game this year, this month. And sadly, that makes us to only choose what may look cool graphically, but as you were saying, may be uncomfortable, maybe alien, and we get scared because of our time constraints that maybe we will show something too unfamiliar. We believe like, that's why I look for Andres. Usually games like ours get someone who helps us with our community very late in the game, like when it's almost about to be published. And with Andres, you can tell them, Andres, how you work with our players, but you have a constant dialogue, right? And
Yep.
you tell us, please go ahead.
Actually, Alex has been one of my victims before. We had a beautiful chat regarding what he expects from a game and what he would like to see in a game and whatever. And we try to translate what people want to see in a game into a game. And not only that, but putting also some historical accuracy sprinkles on top of that. So not only it's not only that the game is multifaceted, but the production of the game is also multifaceted, because it's not only pleasing history and not only pleasing the fans, but it's also doing all together while trying to retell a story that has been told in an awful way.
Yeah. On our Friday threads, go ahead, Andres.
Of course. I also believe that our game has a tendency to lean into prejudice, almost touch it, so that people can feel attracted to the game, to something familiar, and then we curve completely. So we go like, yeah, this is a Spanish character, and people think, oh, the Spanish did horrible things in the Mexica territory, and we go like, no, she healed them, and then we go, okay, this is La Malinche, and people go, yeah, the traitor, this character, right? No, she was actually a different character, and this is no sé qué, whatever. No, completely different. So we try to lean into that, while at the same time going, no, we're doing the opposite. So
Exactly,
it's a kind of a mix-up for the audience.
Yeah, the characters, fortunately, because of the factions, are relatable, so that there's a common sensation. Okay, Mexica, okay, Spanish, okay, the Christians, the other factions. And Andres on his weekly Friday threads has informed us of this is exploding. People are liking this. If you go to Mexico and ask about one of our characters, Xicotencatl, Prince of Tlaxcala, I can't help but smile when I say his name. Sadly, very few people will know who he is. But on our Twitter, he has exploded, right, Andres?
Yeah, I was expecting like a regular answer, but the response was humongous. People love and stand for Xicotencatl as a hero and as something that they admire, actually.
Yeah, so we really try to make use of our smaller team, of our early stage, in order to have this discovery. We are making bets. We share content of Isabel. We share content of this Prince Xicotencatl, and we see what players want to play first. We listen a lot to you academic players, because fortunately, I believe we have, let's say, shared objectives. We really want to show that by listening to academic findings, something better can happen instead of the usual way. The usual way would be NDAs all around, and myself just making all the shots with the team, and that's it. And that's why games are improving in terms of pixels. But in terms of content, we're leaving so many opportunities on the table. So we want to change that.
No, that's great. Yeah, and I also, that's one point I wanted to make, that you're very open about your creative process. If I'm not mistaken, on your website you have a dev journal. You often share images on social media. You talk with academics. So it's interesting how you envision the relationship between developers and players, and the scholarly community as well, and how you incorporate that. And I'm really looking forward to see how that all of that combines into a final product, like, and that they have those multiple voices heard and at the same time. Although I can imagine that sometimes it gets, I mean, if historians say one thing and player audiences say another, how do you choose again? I can imagine that's
well,
not easy.
Let me tell you the secret, Alex, and Andres can validate this, but we usually just cave to our players.
Yeah.
I mean, everyone has their opinion, the historians, our teammates, but at the end of the day, what our players really ask, what they play, when they share positive comments, we're like, oof. I even tell Andres that when we get hate comments, because naturally we've gotten them, those are good comments, because they tell us that we are provoking. like it's the title of our event. We try to provoke and hopefully be thought-provoking in the same way.
May I ask, what kind of pushback are you getting? Because I mean, apart from, the well-known hate comments that people get all the time on Twitter, are you getting pushback like in terms of content, in terms of representation, in terms of how you're structuring the game?
I feel we haven't had any yet. I actually hope we do sometime. I actually hope sometimes someone says, we need more representation of this. So we learn more about that thing, right? There's no real bad feedback. Everything is to improve the game and to improve the experience. And this game tries to teach something, right? So what better way to teach something that with all the perspectives taken into account. So if someone says, this game doesn't have any representation, well, it doesn't, so we should do more. This game doesn't have any whatever, so okay, it doesn't, so we really do have to do it. If it's something that's going to push the game forward, then yes. If someone says, there's not enough white people in this game, we're going to go, okay, you can play whatever else. So, but if someone says, there's no, I don't know, female Mexica representation, which we had, if we didn't, we didn't, and someone says there's no female Mexica representation, we will, okay, that's true. They're an important part of the game, of the history. We can add them on. So yeah, so far we haven't gotten any, and I'm actually hoping for some to come along, so we learn a little bit more and we make the game better, which is the objective of the game.
Yeah, the main complaint is, when is the game going to ship?
Yeah.
There has been a few other, but hopefully they are, like Andres is saying, they're not like a daily miss. So when we, for example, did our Comic-Con prototype, we got the comment that there's too much history. This feels like a history lesson. And I'm like, what's the problem with that? I was feeling like, here's double history, but no. I had to concede. Again, our players, we always lean into them. So we usually thought of our game that it would be something like a Mesoamerican Game of Thrones. So we would go even deeper into the factions, deeper into the different political players. But with our Comic-Con prototype, we learned that no, our players, apparently the market wants to see more the cosmic horror side. So that's why we changed our protagonist. We used to have a very cool sailor, a real sailor, but now we leaned into Isabel and Malinche. I've also, fortunately, there are very individual comments, and as Andres is saying, there's no like one unified big complaint. I've also gotten the comment in Reddit, in the Mexico subreddit, that I'm not Mexican enough to speak about Mesoamerican history. That one, yeah. It's so weird. Yeah, right now, again, everything happens in a context. So right now, we are, let's say, importing some of the issues that you can hear all the time in the US, that you have to be of a specific color of your skin in order to speak about specific things. That didn't used to happen here in Mexico, and that is something very recent. So we're speaking in English. We're not speaking in Spanish. We're not speaking in the Mexica language, which was Nahuatl. So on Reddit, apparently I gave the impression that I wasn't Mexican enough in order to speak about our content. But again, I take that as, let's say, a positive thing. I could get sad and angry and close the internet, but no, I really take it as we're provoking, and it's not bad enough that it stops our work.
That's fair. Also, I mean, games can be dubbed and subbed in different languages. So I would assume that if English is one language, Spanish would be.
The new generation,
they have to be.
Right?
The new generations are now playing here in Mexico a lot in Spanish. I believe you and I, Andres, we were used to playing in English, right? And it wasn't an issue for us?
That was how I got my vocabulary from.
I learned English by games, yeah.
So did I.
But it happens.
Same.
New generations are strange.
Same. Well, I mean, it's good. It's like the more language options you have, the better. I played some game when I was growing up. I did not play any games in English. They were all dubbed and subbed in Italian. And now that I'm definitely older, some games I still play in Italian because I think it makes more sense. Like Assassin's Creed 2 and like the whole Ezio trilogy. I played in Italian because like, yeah, it's a game set in Italy. I'm gonna play in Italian.
I kind of
Nice.
hate how they fake the accent. Ezio Auditore.
So bad.
No.
It's so bad. But I mean, like, if I were to play a game set during, you know, the Spanish conquest, if it was in Nahuatl, I would 100% get the language and subs.
You
and
can
English
see
subs because I
how-
don't speak Nahuatl.
Yeah, you can see a bit of Nahuatl with a content that Andres shared, one of our interviews with a real Nahua historian. We added subtitles in Nahuatl, and it was such a shame that we learned that YouTube doesn't have an option for Nahuatl, a language spoken by millions of people here in Mexico. We had to add the Nahuatl subtitles as Spanish, Mexican Spanish in YouTube.
That is problematic on so many levels. But like it's always like the language thing is always like a balance between doing something that is historically accurate and doing something that you can distribute on a larger scale. Unfortunately, for obvious reasons, in the ideal world, every character who speaks their own language would speak their own language and have that. But I understand the technical difficulties with that.
We have
but at the
to be
same
very
time,
practical. Go ahead.
At the same time, you can incorporate that into the story. I mean, in Assassin's Creed Valhalla, in the Vinland arc, you do have the is it Iroquois language that they're spoken by the characters, and then it becomes a I mean, it becomes a point in the plot, so you can incorporate that as well. I think if there's an opportunity for it. I'm sorry.
Absolutely.
They did that something similar, although weird, in the TV show. What is it? Barbarians, the one about the Roman wars in Germany, where all the Romans spoke Latin with an English accent, and all the Germanic tribes spoke modern German.
Yeah.
And there were interpreters that were actually going. That was cool. Although I take issue with how they pronounce Latin because those are my ancestors. No, I'm joking. But I'm not Italian enough for that.
Even if they speak Latin, they still have to be British.
Yes, exactly. They still have to have the received pronunciation and then put it in Latin.
They have to be refined, and really hard to find.
Exactly.
No other way to say it.
I will look for it. I have seen the show on Netflix, but I didn't know this. I will look for it. Yeah.
And it made for an interesting dynamic because then you understand the need for interpreters, because even if you try really hard, you can't understand what other people are saying.
Sure.
And also the block, the barricade between ideologies, right? Because you think something, but I can't understand it completely because I do not understand the language. Sometimes words don't translate as emotionally as they should. It happens a lot when you watch English dubbed anime. It sounds so cringy, so cringy, because the words have an impact in Japanese, and they have a cadence and a motion, let's say, a flow that English doesn't really cut it, and it sounds very cringy and very uncomfortable. And it's that same thing. The words don't really come across when you translate them, and that's why translators and people trying to understand another language are so relevant for games and for history as a whole.
That's true. We have one comment from the chat saying that we need Nahuatl and Mayan games, which is I agree. I wish we had more.
We were recently at the Maya Ruins. We gave a tour on December, and many of the challenges to game development are somewhat invisible because IGN never reports it. They always report the sexy new trailer, and sometimes you don't hear that there is not enough Maya games with the language or with the cultures because there's no funding, sadly. It is a very tricky balance in order to get funding because it's a catch-22. You have to be successful. You have to say, yeah, I come from Halo, in order to, take my money, please, even if you don't have anything complete. Or you have to be very advanced into development so that they trust you as a new in the team. But you need money in order to get something faster with lots of teammates. This game development is very expensive. In the specific case of the Latin American ecosystem, what do players play more? So it's very much AAA games, and now the new generation's mobile games. Like there's a big gap in between of AA and indie games. Therefore, when you pitch to investors here in Mexico, they're like, what are games? There's never been the success story of, that studio was acquired by Ubisoft or Nintendo or they're working on mobile games like casino games. Please come here. And in order to get out of this tendency, a good way is to speak to you guys who have played more games than just AAA, than mobile. That's why we made the decision of going to the English-speaking players first. It would be easier to, let's say, develop everything in Spanish. I can speak better Spanish than English. Andres can probably tell you the same thing.
I hope so.
And there are millions, fortunately, of Spanish-speaking players. But we would depend entirely on making sexy 3D graphics. And potentially, since it hasn't happened before, we would be struggling more with funding. They wouldn't understand, like, oh, you got 1 million likes on Twitter. Some investors, because we have gotten investment before, some investors, when I pitched it to them and we got that funding, I was working with VR at the day. And when I pitched VR for preventing high-risk incidents, the investor said, so I don't understand, are you going to use like city rooms? Like city rooms, like in Carta?
Oh.
You cannot believe the huge gap that exists, specifically with investors in Latin America. It's like, and they are getting more sophisticated, but that is the main issue that the Latin American game ecosystem has. And that's why we're working in English so that we can get out of that trap.
No, yeah, interesting. I also have a question about something that you talked a little bit about at the end of the presentation. I think Andres was saying, use it in your education, use it in your schools. Of course, there is this growing trend of video games and historical video games being used in education. Assassin's Creed, perhaps the best example of it. Civilization as well has often been used. I have had the pleasure of trying a demo out of the game, and I saw in the loading screens you had these small texts like with historical information, so that those are educational, I think. But do you have any specific plans or ideas of how your game could be used for educational purposes?
Yeah, Alex, that's $1 million question. Literally, I hope so.
I mean, are you planning on a Dream of Darkness Discovery Tour anytime soon, or?
That would be amazing.
The main problem that we have is that we are having more opportunities than the amount of teammates that we have right now. So some of our conversations having, for example, with the Get Institute, that was super interesting, and other organizations, and they ask content like this. So we have to prioritize. Either we build first the game, the playable part that puts front and center, gets scared instead of getting informed, or we build the tour. So we really prioritize what can get us to funding first. We haven't had, sadly, found a fundraising teammates, a fundraiser who can help us in order to pursue and prioritize the opportunities. Because if, for example, fortunately, we got an academic opportunity, a museum, an institution who said, I want to use your game to teach, and we have this amount of resources, we would absolutely build that, finish that first. But it takes a lot of time in order to to have a dialogue, in order to follow up with the opportunities. Right now, it is a big problem that we don't have someone specialized in fundraising. Just for example, creating content for our community, it takes a long time, right, Andres?
Yeah, it takes quite a lot of time. It's not just posting for posting's sake. You have to actually think about what you're doing and why you're doing it. For instance, our Friday threads, I take my time to do my research. It's not just putting random things in a succession. You have to research, and I tend to put at the end my sources, because it's not just entertainment or tweets or just text, right? It's kind of an academic text, no? Very, very, very short academic text, right? But it has to be well researched, has to have a point, has to have a conclusion, has to be smart.
So we believe that by creating this kind of valuable content on our communication side, on the game, by sharing that content, we hope that we discover an institution who says, I want to collaborate with you, please, that content would work amazingly with my institution, instead of deviating, instead of chasing that very different opportunity in contrast with games. I had the opportunity to pitch to Shark Tank some time ago, and we suffered that immensely. We believe that by creating our pitch for Shark Tank for an institution, that the investor would say yes, that the institution would say yes, and it happened the opposite. They were like, again, the investors are not very sophisticated in Mexico, and they were like, until you get to the yes from the institution, we'll invest in you. And the institution said, until you get yes from an investor, yeah, we will give you the opportunity to work here. So the only thing that can get any team to escape from those vicious cycles is players. If you have players, everything else happens.
Mm-hmm. No, that's true. And I think from what we've seen, that the game will be very educational in and of itself as well already. So it's I mean, all of the research that feeds into it will, I mean, it's going to be very, I mean, I myself am looking forward to learning about Aztec culture with your game. So
stay away from the Twitter so you can learn from the game.
Yeah.
On that note, one smaller question. I mean, you've already like talked about this like in your answer to other questions. So recently we have seen Tenochtitlan in the movie Eternals, with 700 copies of the Templo Mayor. Because you know we need more temples, all the temples in one city.
Control V, Control C.
Yo, dog! I heard you like the Tenochtitlan.
I heard you like temples. Then here we go. Have 7,000 temples. There was a beautiful tweet going around of the answer to that with Paris with 700 churches of Notre Dame dropped.
The Aztec Empire comic, our friends, yeah.
Oh yeah, okay. So you know that. That's excellent. That was a great answer to that.
I had mezcales with them not long ago.
Excellent. And even before that, and I'm sorry to have to mention this, but the fourth Indiana Jones movie, of which we do not speak. Great fan of Kate Blanchett, but dear God, was she terrible in that? But everything was terrible in that movie.
I mean, I have my Indiana Jones hat here. Yeah, Indiana Jones.
I was Indiana Jones for Halloween. So we've seen the Aztec Empire being represented to various degrees of awfulness in popular media. So what do you think your game is adding in terms of how the empire is represented, is being represented, let's say in the last 10 years?
The minimal effort in research.
That is an excellent answer.
That would be the first point.
Yeah. So it is paradoxical, and I wish there were more research about it, but the more resources you have, the less time you have for research. I recognize a lot Pixar, because at the time they escaped from this trap. They would, for example, for the movie, they would actually fly in their team to visit South America so that the waterfalls were what represented in the game. In the similar way, they traveled here to Mexico to better understand the Day of the Dead. Still, they make some mistakes, but they make the effort, and that effort is super expensive to pay all of your team to research. So I understand that in this case, Marvel did not do that effort, because 3D developers are ready, the artists are ready, and if you say no, wait for it until the research is complete, you have to pay those salaries, and you have to pay those salaries for not representing your Tenochtitlan city. There are talks of John Lasseter and Steve Jobs who said we were willing to pay those wages so that if at some point something was not working on the story, we would pause anything until the script reflected the environments, the characters that we wanted. That is such a risky bet. So in our case, what we believe that is the opportunity for our game and for more teams, it would really benefit from this pre-production stage. We're very open about it, that we don't have funding, we burn through our savings, and we communicate what is working, what is not. because more teams are slowly discovering this. You can hear now that there are AA games, shorter games for people who have children and PhDs and so many things to do. So smaller games are appearing. Now there are more, for example, stores in itch.io where the store understands, and if you don't want to give a cut to itch.io, like 0% goes to itch.io, I understand itch.io says, because you're an indie team and well, it's hard enough as it is. So the more that we show that by doing good research, a better game can come out, we believe that that will happen more often in our industry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a
it's
great
super
answer.
Expensive, but someone has to do it.
There's also, besides research, there's also the thing about characters. We're not choosing Moctezuma and Hernan Cortez. We're not choosing
as the protagonist.
the things that you would normally see in an Aztec game or an Aztec story even. We're choosing two unsung heroes and another warrior, and there's things that you don't know, things that you kind of know, but that you don't know completely, and things that you really don't know. And that's something that the Mexica and all of Mesoamerica has, right? Stories that people don't know. There's a story about the Tlaxcalteca army fighting samurais in Vietnam back in the way back in the day. I haven't done my research on it. I will. We will talk about it. Spoiler. But there's stories that we haven't heard, not even us that are Mexican, and that's something that we put on the table that movies and or video games and books and whatever have already haven't already taken into consideration. It's always Moctezuma, it's always Cuauhtémoc, it's always Hernan Cortez, it's always the usual. It becomes bulk games, bulk Aztec games, and that's not what we're doing.
I think in doing so, there is this trend more and more of historically researched games. I think the games are getting better in that respect, definitely. Like I'm always reminded of this example. I think it's from 2005, this game Spartan Total Warrior or something. It was like this action adventure spin-off of the Total War series, and in the game, I think in one level it's set in 300 BC, but you're fighting against Emperor Tiberius near the Colosseum or something like that. So I think stuff like that doesn't fly anymore today. Like I think games like Assassin's Creed and Civilization, I don't know if Civilization, definitely Assassin's Creed and the indie production games, they have set a bar, and that we're seeing more interestingly historically researched games, and the fact that you're steering away from the stereotypes and you're focusing on actual historical content. I think that's another major step forward in the representation and the production of these games.
There's also the thing about focus, because we're focusing on a very small period of time, right? And if you take into consideration Civilization or Age of Empire, they have to go abroad a lot of times, and a lot of civilizations and people of different origins. We're doing something that took place in 200, 300 years approximately. So there's a lot of stories in here, but there's not much on the side. So we have to, we can use only this, and this will give out a great game. And if you want to make another game about this part, it's going to be great as well, because it's shorter as well.
So something to be said about choosing to show people who are in with the army, but they do professions that are different from being soldiers, right? Because many times when you play these games, especially when you play strategy games, you don't think about anything but soldiers and everything else. So the armies are shown as just having soldiers and generals and everything else. You don't have provisions, you don't have medics, you don't have anything else. And maybe this will also make people think more about how an army works and like what kind of professions or crafts were there at the time, and what kind of people would do them, right? Because the idea that we have is that everyone who went to conquer with the conquistadores was a male, but then again, in historical record, we know that there were women, and we know that they would be nurses and doctors. But I mean, we know it because we've been talking to you guys and we've been reading and we've been preparing for this, but I don't think like the general public would know. So that's probably something that they would be interested in. Be ready for people to yell at you that women did not exist in that time. You know that, right?
Because women have never colored. Colored women are not a thing, right? Ever.
right? Never. We've never existed. We just sprout from the ground under savages.
From the 16th century forward, women came out of
Exactly. In ancient Greece, they just came out inside of houses. Anyways, right?
And we make use of, let's say, fiction in order to say barbaric things of the period. It's so it's a big temptation to, let's say, since they are our ancestors, to paint the Mexica as civilized people who did everything right, but we will present the Spanish saying their barbaric things I really believed, like, go ahead, Marina, you're the only woman in the group, your debate. That's how they thought. And we will also genuinely portray, which is hard for a Mexican, but we'll genuinely portray the good things about Christianity coming to Mexico. Super hard to do, but we're trying our best to do it.
Of you.
Yeah, because unfortunately, I like philosophy, and our team is, well, such an interesting team. So sometimes we just had a game design meeting before this call, and the team said, but what about this from Inception? And what about this from this philosophy book? And what about this God? And I'm like, well, guys, we have to find what we can build. And it is possible, fortunately, just by editing. It is something horrible, but you have to say no to the good ideas in order to make room for the best ideas. And that is something that as indie developers is so hard, because they're your children. I mean, these two characters, I feel them as my daughters. Our team feels them that way. And when you have to say, no, she won't face this cool boss, it will be this other character. Oh no, it won't be this boss because our historian just informed us that this would be more interesting. And we're like, we try to edit ourselves instead of the market doing that for us.
I don't know if Kate has any more questions. Oh yeah, there's okay. I have one more if I can, because games are of course media in where the player is granted agency, and of course, and with historical context, agency can be problematic in that you can end up with stories that are counterfactual or ahistorical. And so I was wondering, to what extent does your game have player choice, and to what extent will choice play with, again, problematically, the facts of history, or the story, the narrative of history, as the sources mention it? Because I mean, can players change history in the game, or does it? I mean, how does that work?
Yeah. So we have to pick our battles in that sense. If you can really change everything, that it becomes super expensive. But one thing that I really stress to the team, as some historians have said, is that there was no such thing as the conquista or the conquest. Fortunately, I can cite historian Matthew Rustle. He says it, it's not me inventing it. So here in Mexico, we always call it, and we are the ones who repeat this the most, that La Conquista is when the Mexica capital surrendered. And that's it. Like the whole of Mexico, this huge country, was conquered. But fortunately, in order to get that point across, it's not a given that the Mexica have to lose in our game. We really want to get across that this was something that it was, even for the protagonist, something that was not obvious that it would happen. Naturally, there is a lot of subtleties into that. We're not changing big events. Fortunately, since these big, interesting events have not been depicted, we're making use of that opportunity in order to depict them well. But the, let's say, ending of the game is something that, fortunately, yeah, our characters will have some say into what happens, even if it's a bit different from history. One of our teammates, Erasmo, our lead designer, always says that, oh, but let's get history away in order to make this cool thing. And yeah, there is a room for that, because at the end of the day, if the teammates are not having fun, then it becomes suddenly impossible as a marathon to build. So we play a bit with that.
No, that's interesting. That I mean, it's still. I mean, the main basis of it is, of course, it has to be a game, and the history is a very nice aspect of it. But it has. I mean, you're allowing for player change and then player customization and stuff like that. Yeah.
I always tell the team, instead of historical accuracy, let's go for historical opportunities. Sometimes you hear, oh, what's a good game? Just make a good game, a quality game. And I'm like, no, we have to be very specific about what's a quality game, what's a good game. There are specific things. In the same way, instead of historical accuracy, which, oh my God, you will never finish with that. Let's go for what is interesting and exceptional from different periods and people. And from those, make a fun game that will survive the market.
I think you said a very interesting thing before, now that the jackhammers have stopped for like 5 minutes. Sorry about that. That like some big events in history came as a surprise, even to the people who were trying to make them happen, which is something that sometimes we lose sight of when we play games, because we already know how it ends. And so everything is very, how do we say, teleological. So like everything is deterministic and it's going there. Whereas actually, more often than not in history, things happen and they don't go as expected. Like that was not the plan. And this was not supposed to work, but it did. And now what do we do, right? What are we doing now? So, or like, how the hell did they put that off? So I think that's a very interesting concept to explore, because history is not deterministic, right? History is it's written by the victors, first of all, by the winners, and then it's also like it can be a sequence of terrible mistakes and things not going as they should. So I think it's important, especially when you're trying to make a sort of different narrative, to really get the message across. I'm very, very intrigued by that. I'm very happy.
I agree entirely, Kate. There's a lot of, fortunately, untapped potential for the collaboration between academics and developers. We don't get this dialogue happening enough between our two industries, but by developers hearing that there's an audience interested in challenging the way things ended, this teleological potential or perception, then the more brave they can be when the new Halo, when the new FIFA comes out. They get really, we all get, let's say, comparing issues. So when we hear that there's an untapped interest by players, that can make it happen in games.
I think as what Kate said, what the history not being deterministic, I think games are the perfect medium to explore the contingency of history. Like in a game, literally everything is just happening, and some of it might be planned, some of it might be completely random, as anyone who plays games can probably attest to. So I think exploiting that potential of the medium is something that's going to be very interesting to see, I think.
However, FIFA is deterministic at times. But we are not allowed to say that, but sometimes it is.
In that sense, it is so good to remember that our medium is super young. So literature, movies, they have their own fights to win in order for those mediums to evolve. So our medium is the youngest. We have this tendency towards this deterministic way of doing games because we come from winning and losing. And winning and losing in turn come from the fact that games were born out of scientist labs. In the very beginning, it was just a technical difficulty. How can you get some Space War is the first game. So how can you get the spaceship to fight? So the very first challenge was these curves with mathematics so that the projectile could be depicted in the very first games. And out of those, let's say, technical restraints of winning and losing as something that can be enjoyed with the limited resources, some colleagues still repeat those kinds of games, even though resources have vastly improved, because naturally we get used to the convention. So in that sense, by new players, for example, Netflix, I was so surprised when I opened Netflix on my iPad and I got the invitation of installing games. And I'm like,
Yeah.
how can Netflix invite me to get these games and that apparently don't cost me a thing because I'm a subscriber? Technically, I was thinking, how do they know what's happening on the App Store? I'm like, oh my God, so many things that can be done in a similar way. If we have games that go away from just winning and losing and explore other aesthetic experiences that software can provide, oof, the potential is unlimited.
True, and I think games are, like I said earlier, they're really evolving, and I think you said literature film, they had to fight their own battles. I think games are moving past that point, because they are getting more mature, more responsible, more better, I think. So it's going to be interesting to see like where the medium matures into further. I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we think so too.
If anyone in the chat has any more questions, I suggest ask them. I don't know if Kate has anything else, if the jackhammers allow. Otherwise, Javier, Andres, do you have any things you want to plug or any final statements you want to make?
Tell us where we can find you guys on any social media and everywhere on the internet. Put it in the chat, and we'll add it in the description of the video when we republish this on YouTube. So that would make it easier.
Do find us on Dream of Darkness VG. You're seeing it on your screen right now. Follow our account, please. We have our new history threads every Friday. We have funny tweets as well. We have the whole work of things. So please, if you're into academic research, follow us because there's a lot of that in there. If you're into games, follow us because there's a lot of that in there. If you're into entertainment as a whole, there's a lot of that in there. And you can stay in the know about how our game is coming up, what's next, how it's coming up, how can you support us, and a lot of other things, right? You can also find the links right here to our link tree, to our Discord server. You can join. We have a lot of chats right there, questions about history. We ask for a lot of input in our Discord, so if you want to help create our game, please do join. You can also participate in our chats, historical chats, give us some reference of some things you would like to see in the game, and a lot of things, right? It's a whole community with a lot of academia, so we really do like that. We love it. And of course, if you want to text us directly, you can write me an email or Javier with some suggestions. You can add me at, I'm writing it in the chat right now.
Thank you.
Right there, if you have any suggestions about thread you would like to see to be seen, a character you would like to be included or talked about in our Twitter or Discord, whatever, you can do so. And yeah, we would love to have you join our everythings. And please do, Javier, if you like to say something.
Yeah, it's so cool to finally be with SASA because, again, we have been enjoying your streams for a while now. And we're looking for new teammates. So if anyone is interested about our fundraiser role, it's super appreciated on our Twitter, on these channels to hear about you. We got an invitation for an academic book. We got an invitation to openings in Games Fund, but we don't have time. Either we develop or we apply. It's hard. I know that there are people out there, but I don't know them. So we'd love to hear from people interested in academic opportunities and games.
Someone in the chat is saying, your game looks so cool. There's such a powerful, scary darkness in much of Aztec myth and reality or history, along with non-darkness powerful culture. And thank you for this. So
thank you for your comment, human being of planet Earth. We would love to hear more of this in our Twitter, on our Discord. Please do join. We're doing our best to make history more interesting, entertaining, and of course, playful. So thank you so much. Thank you guys for having us. This has been a lot of fun. Please, people, remember to enter bit.ly/DOD SASA for a very special bundle. The scene includes the moment when the Mexica met the Maya. So if you're interested in that, you can have a special exclusive look joining that link. So please do so. We would love for you to have it. And as I said before, use that information, that research in classrooms, your academic research, your upcoming book, your upcoming article, your whatever. Thank you so much for having us. Thank you so much for asking questions and for having such an amazing effort to save ancient studies and give them a new light with games and whatnot. Thank you.
We try. Thank you. Thank you for coming. Of course, as soon as you have a beta ready, like come to our Twitch.
Of course.
we will live stream. You may be interested in our next live stream series because we will be playing Uncharted 4 with a bunch of archaeologists. So we're gonna have opinions.
They're gonna have a lovely
kind of party
stuff.
Oh, actually, Kate, you might as well say what we're playing on Friday and next Friday.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So on Fridays at 2 p.m. Eastern time, we are playing Assassin's Creed Origins Curse of the Pharaohs with Egyptologists of all sorts.
I love when a bunch of people gather to trash something. It's an amazing experience.
This Friday, we will have 2 Italians, someone from New Zealand, Australia. Yeah, we will have Alex and we will have Brianna. So it's going to be very cross-cultural and everyone's going to be trashing the game. So that's fantastic. We love it.
It's going to be fun for everyone except Ubisoft.
Probably.
Really they have it coming.
Them. We like them.
I mean,
they put out the game. They knew it's coming.
Yeah, I mean, they know.
They know. And then next week on the 22nd, on Tuesday, we will have a special at 2 p.m., which we will play the Odyssey part of the Assassin's Creed Odyssey Valhalla crossover with the host of the podcast, Let's Talk About Myths, Baby. So we will be thirsting after Cassandra and talking about mythology and Greek stuff. Great things, and then at the beginning of March we will be playing the new Assassin's Creed Valhalla DLC, Dawn of Ragnarok, at Ludo History. So we will be hosts we will be guests on Adam's channel. We will have opinions, and of course the Mushroom will come back. So yes, follow us on Save Ancient Studies on any platform. We are on Twitter, we are on Instagram, we are on Twitch, we are ubiquitous, we are everywhere. You can't escape us.
Likewise.
All right. So good luck with the rest of your development. Like, do keep us updated, and
of course,
we're all really looking forward to seeing what it will grow into. So thank you
so
again, and
right.
thank you for the invitation.
Yeah,
and
thank you.